The twin sons of Gorgotha hung low, casting elongated, jagged shadows across the obsidian arena. The elite had gathered to witness a ceremony masked as violence. Thunder resonated, not from the sky but from the stomping boots and guttural howls of alien warriors pounding their chests. High atop his throne of carved bone and flame, King Orvus of the Varug Dominion raised a clawed hand, silencing the throng. He stood with the weight of countless conquests etched into his posture, his voice like fractured stone. "The one who subdues my daughter shall take her hand in marriage, thereby securing the Dominion's alliance." A hush fell, thick and dangerous. All eyes turned to the gate at the far end of the pit. Chains rattled and the doors burst open. She emerged like a storm forged in war itself. Princess Cesara Varag, heir to the Dominion, a creature of sinew, battle scars, and raw fury. Her skin bore ritual brands, her eyes shimmered with golden fire, and in her hands were two bone-hafted axes that she spun in lazy circles, as if daring the galaxy to blink first. The spectators leaned back instinctively. Cesara didn't bow, didn't acknowledge the crown. She growled once and paced the sand like a predator denied a kill. The last suitor, some elite noble from the Black Rim, still hadn't regained the use of his legs after she'd broken them without ever touching a weapon. King Orvus turned his head slightly. "There is one more contestant," he said. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. "Human, weak-boned, short-lived, fragile." But Cesara paused, only for a breath. That was when Captain Darius Cade stepped into the arena. No armor, no cape, just desert fatigues, a single staff slung across his back, and the calm eyes of a man who had faced monsters and grown bored of them. He stopped 5 paces from Cesara, didn't draw the staff, didn't speak. Cesara studied him, her stance stiff with surprise. He wasn't trembling, not even sweating. The way he looked at her, it wasn't lust, fear, or challenge, it was interest. King Orvus's grin widened. "Begin." Cesara didn't hesitate. She lunged like a comet, her axes flashing arcs of death through the heat-hazed air. Darius moved just enough to avoid them. One sidestep, one lean, one twist. No wasted motion, no retaliation. The crowd roared, hungry for blood, but Darius was not bleeding. Cesara snarled and changed her rhythm. She was trained by the ancient war dancers of the Bone Legion. Her strikes were not just brutal, they were beautiful. A choreography of calculated madness, and still he didn't strike back. He blocked, parried, redirected her attacks into empty space. He smiled once and it enraged her. "Fight," she spat, swinging with such force the wind cracked like thunder. He caught one axe at the haft with his staff. The impact shuttered down both their arms, then he pushed her gently back. "Are you done showing off?" he asked. Her eyes flared. In the next moment, they were locked in a brutal, breathless blur. Cesara spun, kicked, swept low. He flipped backward, landed, used the momentum to trip her, but she twisted midair and landed in a crouch. Dust flew. Blood finally dripped from a shallow cut across his cheek. Darius chuckled. "There she is." Cesara froze. For the first time in years, someone had seen her. Not the monster in the arena, not the political token, not the savage princess, just the fighter, the woman. She straightened slowly, axes lowering just a little. "You think this is some game?" "No," he said. "I think you've been waiting your whole life for someone who didn't flinch when they looked you in the eye." She studied him. The arena was silent now. Even the king leaned forward, hungry for blood or bonding. And in that silence, Darius stepped closer and held out the staff, not in threat, but an offering. "Call it a draw," he said, "and have a drink with me." Cesara blinked, then without warning, she knocked the staff from his hands and slammed a kiss into his mouth with enough force to rattle his teeth. The crowd exploded into chaos. King Orvus burst out laughing, and high above the arena, the war banners began to shift in the wind, bearing not the sigil of conquest, but the first mark of union. The feast following the duel was held beneath the twin moons of Gorgotha, under a vast canopy of hanging bones and firelit banners. The tables overflowed with smoked meats, fermented root drinks, and steaming bowls of blood fruit. Warriors of the Dominion clashed drinking horns and roared with laughter, their scars gleaming in the flame light. At the center of it all sat Cesara, legs kicked over the throne beside her father's, drinking straight from a jagged beast's skull. Darius sat 2 seats away, quiet, watchful. He hadn't touched the drink. His ribs still ached from Cesara's last knee to the chest. She had kissed him, yes, but only after nearly killing him. Now she stared at him like a beast sizing up its prey, or perhaps its equal. "I don't understand you," she said, dropping the skull cup onto the floor and leaning forward. Her golden eyes gleamed with something closer to curiosity than anger. "I get that a lot," Darius replied. "You didn't fight me for power, not for glory, not even for survival, so why?" He shrugged. "Because I saw someone who didn't need saving, just someone who deserved not to be handled like a caged animal." Cesara tilted her head. "You think I'm tame now?" "God, no," he said deadpan. "You'd probably break my spine if I asked you to pass the salt too fast." She smirked, but the air shifted. The laughter faded just a bit. Warriors leaned in. One, tall, antlered, draped in ceremonial chains, stood from the opposite table. "Human," he snarled, pointing a clawed finger. "You touch what is not yours. You are unproven, unblooded. She is not yours, not until she yields." Darius didn't move. "Is that how it works here, even when the princess herself has already chosen?" Cesara stood suddenly, her voice cracked like lightning. "Enough, Vorin. Sit before I make a second example of you." But Vorin was not a man of reason. He charged. Darius rose with a smoothness born from countless wars. The moment Vorin swung, Darius ducked under the blow, grabbed his arm, twisted it, and slammed his knee into the warrior's gut. Vorin dropped. "No weapons, just precision." Silence fell. Cesara walked slowly toward Darius, watching him with a strange glint in her eye. "You could have killed him," she said. He shook his head. "Killing doesn't impress me. Listening does." She laughed, not cruelly, but with something raw and unfiltered. Then she leaned in and whispered, "I've never wanted to tear someone's shirt off and strangle them with it at the same time." "Must be love," he murmured. And around them the Dominion began to whisper, some in disbelief, others in fear because something more dangerous than taming was happening. Cesara wasn't being conquered. She was falling for a man who treated her like no one ever had. The bone hunt was the oldest rite in Varog tradition, older than blood feuds, older than thrones, a trial held in the wraith wastes where winds howled like the dead and beasts roamed the sand like ghosts. Those who survived emerged not with trophies, but with the right to speak as trueborns of the Dominion. Cesara had done it when she was 13, alone, armed with nothing but her bare hands and a shard of obsidian. Now she stood beside Darius, watching him wrap his wrists in leather. They were preparing to descend into the wastes for the hunt together, not to prove dominance, but to prove understanding. "I've never taken anyone into the wastes with me," she said. "Let me guess," he muttered, tightening the wraps. "They never made it out." "They never made it in," she said with a grin. They entered the wastes at dusk. The air was sharp with cold. The sand bit like glass. For hours they moved in silence. Cesara showed him how to read the shadows between dunes, how to follow the jagged tracks of the bone lizards, how to listen when the sand started to whisper, which meant something ancient was watching. At the base of the black ridge they found it, a bone drake curled in slumber, its ribs exposed like the fingers of a buried god. Darius crouched low. "We going around it?" Cesara looked at him. "We go through it?" The battle was a blur. The drake struck with claws like spears and a tail that shattered stone. Darius rolled beneath it, using its momentum against itself, driving a blade into the socket of its knee. Cesara climbed the beast's back and broke one of its wing joints with a war cry that shook the ridge. When it fell, panting, dying, it looked not afraid but reverent. Darius stood beside her, breath heavy, hands bloodied. "That enough proof?" Cesara looked at him. You didn't come here to prove anything. No, he agreed. I came to understand. She stepped closer. Then you already passed. The storm began to rise, but neither moved as lightning carved the sky. Cesara pulled him close, her voice low and rough. I would have hated you, she said, if you tried to control me. Darius kissed her cheek. I don't want to control you. I want to stand with you. And in that moment, under thunder and sand, beside the corpse of a beast older than kingdoms, she knew something terrifying and beautiful had happened. For the first time, Cesara didn't feel like a weapon. She felt like someone worth being chosen for who she was, not what she could destroy. And Darius, he wasn't taming her, he was awakening her. By the time they returned from the Wraith Waste, the palace had changed. The warriors who once laughed at the idea of a human bonding with the barbarian princess now watched with weary silence. Cesara, still streaked with the drake's blood, entered the throne hall ahead of Darius, dragging the carved fangs of the fallen beast behind her like war trophies. She dropped them at her father's feet, her chin lifted, her eyes blazing with the same fire that had burned since she was born. King Orvas leaned forward slowly. He said nothing for a long moment, scanning the dried blood, the sand scars, the bruises on her knuckles, and the man who stood behind her without shame or fear. This, the king said at last, was not part of my game. Darius stepped beside Cesara. Then maybe it's time to stop treating her like a contest, murmurs spread through the gallery. Several warriors shifted uneasily. The king's own counselors avoided his gaze. Cesara didn't flinch. You offered me to whoever could tame me, she said, her voice echoing in the stone chamber. But you never considered I might choose. Orvas's jaw clenched. The Dominion follows strength, not sentiment. I chose strength, she replied. His Darius didn't smile. His face was hard. I didn't come for your daughter's hand. I came because I saw a warrior being caged by her own people. You want loyalty? Give her the throne. Let her lead on her own terms. Silence thickened like fog. Then King Orvas stood. He descended the steps with the weight of centuries in every motion until he was just feet from Cesara. The air grew tighter. Older warriors reached for their blades, unsure of what might come, but the king looked at his daughter, not as a prize, but as something unknowably dangerous. Then slowly he removed the bone crown from his head. You were not raised to rule, he said. No, she said. I was raised to fight, and you would take a human as your equal? She didn't look at Darius. She didn't have to. Yes. Orvas looked at the crown in his hands. Then with a grunt, he held it out, not to Darius, but to her. The crowd gasped. Cesara took it. She didn't place it on her head. She dropped it at her feet. I'll earn it, not inherit it. And in that moment, she won not just the right to rule, but the hearts of those who had doubted her for a lifetime. 2 nights passed. The fortress held a strange stillness, as if waiting to exhale. Cesara and Darius stood on the upper terraces where the twin moons lit the black cliffs below. She wore no crown, no armor, just her own skin tattooed with the language of battles past. Darius leaned against the stone rail, bandaged but steady, his pulse quiet despite what they both knew waited ahead. They're not happy, she said. They're afraid, he replied. Fear is loud when it loses control. She looked down at the lower courts where a group of blood counselors were whispering near the old battle horns. She could hear them. She always heard them. She's lost her edge. She bows to a Terran. She'll bring softness to the throne. Cesara turned to Darius. They want me to burn you away. He met her gaze, calm. And you? I want to burn with you. He stepped toward her. Then let them speak. I didn't fall for you because you were a fire I could hold. I fell because you were the only flame I didn't want to run from. She moved into him slowly, placing her hand over his heart. No one's ever said that to me. They didn't deserve to. Below, a horn suddenly blared, an alarm. The southern watchtower had ignited its fire beacon, invasion. Cesara turned, instinct flaring. Clan Braska, they're testing me. Darius grabbed his blade. Let them. She grinned, feral and free. Then it's time I show them what it means to choose war with a queen who bows to no one and a human who fights beside her. They leapt from the terrace like wolves from the cliff into the firelight below. As warriors scrambled and horns cried through the night, the battle hadn't even begun, but the legend already had. The southern gates shuddered beneath the battering of ironclad beasts and bone-hammered siege engines. Clan Braska had wasted no time. Under the cover of night, they had marched with war banners raised, their warlords hoping to crush Cesara before she could claim true dominion. It was a move born of arrogance and fear. They thought her distracted, softened, tamed. They had no idea what she had become. Cesara stood atop the walls with her war cloak flaring like a wing of flame. Below her, warriors assembled, their loyalty no longer compelled by her father's name but by hers. She pointed her curved blade forward, eyes fixed on the enemy tide surging through the canyon pass. "Hold until I say otherwise," she commanded. Her second-in-command stepped forward. "You'll face them alone?" "No," came Darius's voice, calm and resolute as ever. "She'll face them with me." The crowd murmured, some doubted, others waited. Cesara turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "You sure you wouldn't miss it?" Together they descended the walls. Before the first war drums thundered, the battlefield was not kind. Dust bit at their eyes, arrows sang past, riders charged, half mad and chanting in guttural growls, but Cesara moved through them like living wrath. Her blade didn't dance, it devoured. Each swing broke rank. Each war cry from her throat sent shudders through enemy hearts. Darius kept close, his movements precise, not loud like hers, but cutting through weakness with ruthless efficiency. When one of the brusque brutes charged at Cesara's exposed flank, Darius was already there, blade drawn, driving it upward into the beast's gut. Blood splashed the sand. The enemy hesitated. She raised her sword high, roared in the old tongue, and the Virag warriors surged forth like a dam finally breaking. The enemy lines crumbled under the weight of a queen and a man who refused to be a shadow. Cesara and Darius stood at the center of the carnage when the final banner of Braske fell, torn and soaked in their own pride. That night, the fires burned not in mourning, but in victory, but Cesara did not celebrate. She sat alone sharpening her blade until Darius joined her. "They won't stop," she said. "I know," he replied. "They think we're an exception or a phase." He looked at her hands, still trembling slightly from the battle. "Then we show them this isn't some rebellion." She looked up. "What is it then?" He didn't hesitate. "It's a beginning." The High Council convened beneath the domed hall of Ashbone, a chamber carved from volcanic glass, built when the first Virag kings rose from the dirt and declared themselves gods. Now, beneath that same roof, the surviving members of the Dominion's warblood sat with clenched jaws, their cloaks heavy with judgment. Cesara entered without pageantry, without escort, and without fear. Darius walked at her side, not behind her, not ahead. The gesture was deliberate and deeply insulting to the old guard. One of the bloodlords, gray-skinned and half-blind, rose from his seat. "You desecrate this hall with him." Cesara's eyes locked with his. "You mistake defiance for desecration and him for anything less than what he is." The bloodlord sneered. "He is not of the line, not of the blood." Darius stepped forward. "You're right. I wasn't born to your throne, but I bled for your people. I fought to protect the same gates you ignored until smoke choked your walls." Another lord stood. "You speak of strength, yet you let a Terran taint your decisions." Cesara unsheathed her dagger. "And yet you never spoke when my father let butchers and cowards poison the throne, so perhaps your silence then disqualifies your voice now." The chamber tensed. Outside, the city watched. Rumors had spread of victory, of a human, of a queen who dared love a man outside her bloodline and refused to be a puppet. Cesara turned in a slow circle, voice rising like a blade's edge. "I will not marry for alliance. I will not kneel for tradition. I will not pretend your fear is law. I have fought your enemies. buried your rebels, and now I offer you a choice." She pulled her blade across her palm, blood dripping to the floor. "You want the old ways? Then try to take them back from me." No one moved, because the old ways were already broken, and the new queen stood not alone, but beside a man who never once tried to silence her flame. When they left the hall together, there were no shouts of protest, no blades drawn, only silence, and then applause, scattered at first, then rising like thunder in every corner of the city. The people who had waited generations to see a queen rise without shackles knew the age of the Bone Kings had ended. The reign of Cesara and the Terran who never feared her had begun. The wind over Gorgotha's cliffs was colder now, not from weather but from change. The old watchtowers had been relit all across the Dominion. Tribes gathered beneath the stormlit sky awaiting the moment that would mark the end of bloodlines, ruled by fear and the beginning of something no tradition had ever dared. Cesara stood at the peak of the Blackhorn Ridge, a cloak of crimson draped across her shoulders, the blade of her first kill sheathed at her back. She wasn't wearing the old crown, she had melted it. In its place, her forehead was marked with a line of ash, the sigil of earned rule. Below her, thousands watched in silence, their war paint worn not for battle but for witness. Darius stood across from her on the ceremonial stone platform, dressed in simple dark cloth, a Terran medallion over his heart. No armor, no weapons, just the man who had stood beside her when every other hand had been raised against her. A fire blazed between them, fed by branches from each major clan. Cesara's voice rang out sharp and clear as the sky cracked above them with distant thunder. "I was forged in a pit," she said, "raised by men who feared softness, trained by voices that demanded obedience, and crowned by a throne I never asked for. But I do not lead by inheritance. I lead because I chose to rise, and because he," she nodded to Darius, "chose to rise with me." The silence that followed was reverent. Then Darius stepped forward, placing his palm over the fire's heat. "I never came to claim a bride," he said. "I came to understand a people I was told to fear, but I found someone who is feared more than anyone because she saw the truth and refused to kneel before it." He looked up at her, steady, quiet. "I don't want your throne. I want the fight beside you. I want the days that won't make songs, the arguments, the silence, the healing." She reached out, he took her hand. Together they stepped through the flame. The ritual was complete, but no crown was passed. Only unity, only choice. And in the crowd, the warlords who had once muttered doubts fell silent, not because they were silenced, but because at last they saw something stronger than fear. Love earned, not demanded, and leadership born not of tradition but of defiance. Years passed, but the echoes of that fire never faded. Cesara ruled not with iron but with iron will. She ended the clan feuds through. Negotiation, not conquest, was her method. She terminated the breeding agreements, granted women the freedom to move without familial constraints, and eliminated the blood vote system that had privileged only the powerful. Many voiced their objections, she allowed them to, and then she demonstrated their error. Darius became her trusted advisor, her envoy to the outer systems, her second line of defense when peril arose. When assassins struck under the cover of darkness, he was the one who maintained vigilance. When commerce faltered with the Terran Republic, he was the one who reminded each faction of the sacrifices made for unity and the accomplishments it had yielded. However, in the tranquility of the garden beyond the Black Hall, they would sit as if unobserved, without the trappings of power, just two spirits finding solace after conflict. She once remarked to him, "You didn't tame me." He responded with a smile, "Didn't try to. You let me run wild." She murmured, nestling against his side, "No." He said gently, "I just ran with you." Their first child, nurtured in both cultures, would eventually symbolize not bloodline purity, but choice, strong from both heritages, fierce from both passions. And when Cesara issued her final decree, etched in steel upon the walls of the capital, it was not a mandate but a fundamental truth. No one is born to govern another. You ascend because you stand alongside them, not above them. History has not forgotten her, The people have never allowed it. She was the untamed daughter no one could control, and he was the human soldier naive enough to cherish her for it.